Hello. Today I thought I'd do something a little different and share with everybody some books that for me were very transformational or transforming in how I did or how I do psychotherapy. I'm a big reader since I can remember. I've always loved to read, particularly nonfiction. And I have a collection of books, around here and there that I refer to often, that I enjoy, and I always revisit and try to stay on top of new developments and review old developments. So I wanted to share some books that I think, unfortunately, with all the people marketing the latest and the greatest inventions in psychotherapy, sometimes these get overlooked, much like humans, most humans, we don't tend to learn from history, so we keep reinventing the wheel. So I would like to share some of these books with you, and maybe you've read them. If not, I highly encourage you to read them. There are so many great books out there. I'm not saying these are the only ones, but these are the ones for me that I enjoy the most, that made an impact on me. So in no particular order. Let's see, what's this? Okay, this is Reality Therapy by the great William Glasser. Now, reality therapy, unfortunately, not enough people know about reality therapy, particularly young therapists these days. Glasser he was originally a psychiatrist, and he went back and specialized in psychotherapy, and found out that people had more choices than they realized they had. And he kind of constructed this therapeutic approach, hence the term reality therapy, on that people are who suffer from mental health issues oftentimes are struggling with accepting kind of what is reality. And he was one of the first, in my opinion, to really focus therapy away from a lot of this the depth psychotherapy and kind of what's happening right now. What are you doing right now? He was real big on behavior, not from a behaviorism perspective, but the choices we make about our behavior. So when someone reacts a certain way, we had a choice in how we reacted. And, seeing how our choices, why we're making our choices, what needs we're trying to meet due to those choices, and alternative ways to respond. In a way, it's kind of a cognitive therapy, but yet I think it really has a good basis in pattern interventions and things like that. Also, anything by Bob Wobbelding, who was a student of Glasser's, I highly recommend if you're really interested in getting a good grasp on reality therapy. It's unfortunately one of those forgotten therapies in this time period, but when it came out, it was pretty groundbreaking. And some of the stories that Glasser tells in the book, I really got a lot of, and emphasizing, again, choice. And that was a big deal to me, that we always have a choice. And sometimes our choices don't meet what our desires are, and so we have to be clear on those. All right, next. Language of Change. Language of Change. Paul Watzlawick. This book to me is I enjoy this book so much. Some of it talks about the brain a little bit, and some of it's maybe a little outdated. But the idea about how language kind of helps construct this experience we have of reality is really important. So getting people to use different language helps to create change in a person's life. This is something you see at the beginnings of kind of the social constructionism movement that Watzlawick was really a big proponent of, and that what is reality is really how we're constructing it moment to moment using language and our actions and these patterns of behavior. And any book by Watzlawick I highly recommend. Some of them are really, I think, crucial in the understanding of kind of a strategic approach to helping people change. But I've always enjoyed language and change. Let's see here. Oh, okay. This is Barry Duncan, Scott Miller, and Jacqueline Sparks. This is The Heroic Client. Hold on. Let me give you the year this one was published because okay. This one I really, really like. This is 2004, the first publishing. I probably read it about a couple of years after this. But The Heroic Client, to me, was one of the first books I got. It's a revolutionary way to improve effectiveness through client-directed, outcome-informed therapy. It's basically a lot of the things that I was doing. It kind of validated it through research and kind of the focus on the outcomes and common factors. And it also made me kind of strive to become a little more effective in regards to getting the interaction, the co-creation of the therapeutic outcome with the client. And at the end of the day, much like another book that I don't have, Bohart and Tallman's book, which the title's escaping me, is that the client is the one that the change happens. We can do things, but we can't really change the client. It's the client that does that themselves. So they're very heroic in that they have to take these chances of coming to therapy, actually do the therapy work, the interaction. And I think this is, years from now, that people will look back and say The Heroic Client was one of those books that was way ahead of its time. And I really, really enjoyed it very much. Okay. The Tactics of Change, Doing Therapy Briefly. Now, this one by Fish, Weekland, and Siegel. This is a great book. If you want to understand the concept of first-order change and second-order change, I highly recommend The Tactics of Change. This is a book that came out many years ago, but I still refer to it. This is coming out of the Mental Research Institute, MRI, their work, and firmly rooted in that kind of brief strategic model, but looking at therapy from a perspective of creating effectiveness, but how when you get to that second order, how things can be more transformational, which I cited them a little bit in my book, The Art of Creating a Magical Session, where I talk about frames of reference and frames of experience, and how being able to create change at the first order is one thing, but when you get to the second order, it kind of totally adjusts the context and allows a lot more client resources to come through. So yeah, Tactics of Change, highly recommend that book. Speaking of change, here's another book I highly recommend. It's called Aesthetics of Change by Bradford Keeney. Now, Aesthetics of Change to me was one of those books where I read the first time and didn't really understand it, but yet I had a perception that something was valid here. Then I read it the second time, and then I went, boom, right? This is this is Brad's masterpiece as far as I'm concerned. This really builds that foundation of a cybernetic epistemology in regards to psychotherapy. And it opened the door for me to understand, again, certain frames of reference, social constructionism. Also moved me to learn about such people as Heinz von Forrester and Humberto Maturana, who've two big influences. I think Brad's, like I said, it's his masterpiece. And I think if you want to understand systemic therapy or therapy in general that's not rooted in just a linear cause-effect perspective, Aesthetics of Change, I think, still holds up. And it also helped me understand a lot of the work of Gregory Bateson. And so I really value that book. Speaking of Bateson, here's a colleague of Bateson. This is an old copy, Strategies of Psychotherapy by the great Jay Haley. So for those of you who don't know, Jay Haley was one of the founders of Strategic Family Therapy. He came out of that MRI. He was a colleague of Bateson. And the reason I like this book was this is one of the first books for me that I could say, yes, sometimes you're supposed to direct your client. So either in graduate school, we're either not doing anything and just doing the Carl Rogers empathy and that, which is great. Or we're over doing just cognitive interventions. And so with Jay Haley, it's like, well, you can just cut through some of that and jump in and give therapeutic tasks, ordeal therapies, all kinds of ways to interrupt patterns to alter the way people experience their problems. And Jay got a lot of flack because he was focused on, or one of his focus was on the power that exists, or that he perceived can exist in psychotherapy, and to use power sometimes to achieve certain therapeutic outcomes. Having said that, though, I think the bulk of Jay's work is very, very useful, and I certainly got a lot out of it. I also had a book, speaking of Jay, I don't think I've got it. Anything by his ex-wife Chloe is great too, because she's a brilliant strategic therapist. All right, next is, speaking of Bateson, okay, so here's Gregory Bateson's book that most people, if you're into Bateson, you've got a copy, Steps to an Ecology of Mind. This and any of his stuff, I like. It's a collection of essays and articles all about psychotherapy, anthropology, science, ecology. I just... There's if you really want to trace back the foundation of systemic therapy, go to the chapter. It's an article he wrote about the theory of alcoholism, and to see how the positive and negative positive and negative feedback loops, and how they can sometimes the solution to the problem only creates more of the problem. Mentality kind of found its voice, and then it was taken and elaborated when he started collaborating with people like Jay Haley and Don Jackson and other people like that. It's just a wealth of information, and I think Bateson is still one of those guys that never really had his due. I mean, academics cite him, but I don't think history so far has viewed him as widely as he could be seen. I hope that changes. I hope there's a renaissance of Bateson. Now, I don't agree with everything Bateson wrote, but a lot of his ideas, I think it definitely creates a perspective shift in how we look at ourselves, particularly if we're thinking of isolated individuals or isolated clients, that there is a connective, the pattern that connects through many things. All right. This is a different one, and I love this book. I love this guy. Alejandro Jodorowsky, Psychomagic, the Transformative Power of Shamanic Psychotherapy. So in case you never heard of Jodorowsky, he is a Chilean-born artist, director, writer, psychotherapist, lecturer. He does all these incredibly strange things. He's best known for his cult movies like El Topo, which is just wild, Holy Mountain, which is even more wild, Santa Sangre, Dance of Reality, Endless Poetry. He's just is a visionary, and he's someone who through art saw that people can heal themselves when they go through certain rituals. His perspective was that our mind, our emotions, all of that, those things that make us react in the unconscious, is all of that's at a symbolic level. And so when we come up with certain tasks to finish these situations or stories that we've been living, because he feels a lot of times that they haven't quite ended, so we need to end it or to have a release from them. We can begin to heal. An example would be someone who has anger toward a parent and having them go out and destroy something that was important to the parent. I remember something about a guy whose dad didn't have time for him because his dad was always writing poetry. And he had this guy, as a boy, had a lot of resentment. So Jodorowsky had him go find a book of poems and then put a picture of his dad on it, and then he had to go out and destroy it, and then kind of put it into some kind of artistic device and write a poem to his dad and put it and mail it to his dad, who may not even be still alive. But this was a tremendous shift for me because I'd already been doing a lot of therapeutic rituals due to the influence of Milton Erickson. And by the way, Jodorowsky freely admits that he was very influenced by Erickson. But with Jodorowsky's idea of how to utilize the unconscious and from a depth psychotherapy perspective, and art and culture, and how to bring that in to help people change and transform is very interesting. Now, there's some controversial stuff in these books of his that I can't agree with all of them, but I think, again, he speaks in metaphors. So sometimes the stories he tells might not be meant to be taken literally. So Psychomagic, Alejandro Jodorowsky. Love it. All right. Okay. Overcoming Destructive Beliefs, Feelings, and Behaviors. Albert Ellis. So overcoming destructive beliefs, feelings, and behaviors. Now, this book was a big deal to me. I started out originally as a cognitive style therapist. I don't consider myself a cognitive behavioral therapist or rational emotive therapist. But what I liked about Ellis, at least in his books, was it just cuts to the chase. I mean, the reason your life's screwy is because you think in screwy thoughts and you try to run away from what is, and as soon as you accept what is and let go of the screwy thoughts, you feel better. Of course, easier said than done, but that's really the gist of it. And his formula of the A, B, C, D, the activating event, belief, consequence, disputing, is just really simple and can be very, very effective. And if you ever, if you knew Al, he could be quite. He's a guy who lived it. Now I give him that. He lived it, but he could be a challenging individual. Funny enough, I had a professor at my graduate program who had Albert Ellis as a clinical supervisor. So I was kind of, well, what was that like? Because I just have this image of Albert Ellis just cussing everybody out, and well, that's the stupidest thing to do. Why would you do that? Only a moron would do that. And he's like, Paul, Al was really probably the most compassionate supervisor I ever had. I was like, really? He said, yeah, he said, there's multiple Als, but when we came with an issue, he was always present. He was centered. I mean, to give it to us straight, but it was always, he wanted us to improve, and he wanted to help people. And but yeah, that book in particular, when I read that, I really, even though I didn't do a lot of the direct cognitive challenging, although sometimes I still do, I really like that book. I thought it was a good place to start if you're interested in particularly also the history of the cognitive and the cognitive behavioral movement. All right, and last for now is An Uncommon Case Book. An Uncommon Case Book, the complete clinical work of Milton Erickson, MD, written by O'Hanlon and Hexham. Okay. This book was pretty foundational for me because I would go over and over this frequently. Still read it. Still go back and review different cases. Erickson, as anyone who knows, was a huge influence, still is, on me. And I find that having the case book, it was really helpful because you got to see all the really weird and strange interventions he did. And to be honest, what the thing I like about this book is that also they list when he didn't succeed. So you'll see, I mean, most of the time he was successful, but every now and then you'll see he recommended this, failure, wasn't able to enact change. And when I saw that, for me, that was very helpful because sometimes we get into our hero worship mindset and we see these great therapists and think, oh, wow, they're always great and they never make a mistake. And we find out that sometimes things just didn't work for Erickson. And sometimes his interventions didn't change people. And it's okay. We do what we can. And if we can't help somebody, then, we refer to somebody who may be able to help. The other thing, too, and I wish I'd had more books here. This is Bill O'Hanlon co-wrote this or co-compiled this. Bill's book, Taproots, which I don't know where the copy, it's around here, was also beneficial for me because Bill was one of the first ones to really kind of take Erickson and try to break it down as simple as possible. The reason I bring that up is God, I don't know how many years ago, I was talking to Bill O'Hanlon at one of these conferences, and I had been really studying Erickson, and he being Bill, and I were talking about Erickson, and I was thinking about how little I knew, and I said, Bill, I've been studying Erickson's work for I don't know how long, and I feel like I only have knowledge of 25% of what Erickson, could do. And then Bill kind of looked at me and he kind of smiled and he goes, "Oh my God, that's the same thing I told Jay Haley." Because, and then Jay turns to me and says, "Bill, I think I've only got 25%. And then I was thinking, well, if Jay only has 25%, maybe I don't even have 25%. And we laughed. But then the reason I'm saying that's what gave me the courage. Because if Jay Haley only has 25%, Bill only has 25%, it gave me the courage to go ahead and write a book about Erickson. Because if everybody's putting in their 25%, maybe one day we'll have a more complete vision of this psychotherapy giant who always saw the clients having more resources, more capabilities than they did. It was always, I think, so ahead of the game that another 50 years we'll still be playing catch up with him. Erickson definitely moved me from a focus on a pathology to a focus on a potential, and a future focus on helping people change in the future instead of being stuck and rooted in the past. So I still review that book all the time, and it gives me a lot of comfort. So, but that's just a handful. We may come back and do more transformational therapy books, but all of these are just highly recommend. If you haven't read them, read them. And feel free to share, books you've enjoyed and have transformed the way you do practice. So have a great day.